Hi there, and welcome to Industry Innovators. In this session, we're going to be talking about layoffs and terminations. And just a reminder that this is an Alberta-based presentation. So if you're outside of the province of Alberta, please refer to your specific legislation. My name is Nicole Carey, and I'm a senior HR consultant at the HR Advantage, and I've been in this field for over 15 years. I work with all kinds of employers, from construction companies, farms, nonprofits, municipalities, and more. And a lot of what I do is help employers handle the tough stuff, like policy changes, team restructuring, and terminations. And I like to do it in a way that's fair and as legally sound as possible and is filled with respect. I don't believe in overcomplicating things. My goal is always to give practical, people first advice that works in the real world. So, whether it's supporting a business through a layoff or helping sort out a workplace issue, I like to make sure that our clients are dealing with HR in a way that's a little less overwhelming. So, as I mentioned, I work with the HR Advantage as an HR consultant. We're a team that handles HR, health and safety, payroll, compliance, and more so that business owners can focus on running the show. We get to know our clients really well. We're not just sending over templates or talking legal speak, and we like to work side by side with our clients to ensure they get real results. Our mission is quite simple. We take HR and compliance off your plate and handle it in a way that's proactive, not reactive, so hopefully there's less surprises and no scrambling. Jumping into our presentation today. So a little bit about the overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the difference between termination for cause, termination without cause, and then layoffs. We're going to talk about the legal steps required for each, how to avoid some common mistakes, and when and how to properly document. Just another note that, again, this is a province of Alberta based presentation today, and that each termination situation is complex and it's totally dependent on the industry, the employer, the individual, and what's been happening in the situation. So if you have a situation that's overly complex, please reach out for help. So before we jump in, let's get clear on the big picture in Alberta. So there are three main ways employment can end that is employer initiated in this province. Each one comes with different steps and requirements. First thing, we have termination for cause, which is serious misconduct. There's no notice or pay, but it needs to be documented and handled properly. There's termination without cause, which is not performance-based, but must provide proper notice or pay. And then there's layoff, which is a pause of employment due to business reasons with strict notice rules, timelines, and the expectation that the employee will return. So think of it like this. If someone is fired for stealing, that's for cause. If business is slow and you need to cut back hours, that's a layoff. If someone just isn't a fit but hasn't really done anything wrong, that's a without cause termination. Those are very simply put examples of what each category means. So starting off with termination for cause, this is one that folks often need the most help with, and it also can be the riskiest. Termination for cause means the employee has done something serious enough that you are choosing to end their employment immediately with no notice and no pay in lieu of notice. But just because someone made a mistake or isn't working out doesn't mean you can pull the trigger for a for cause dismissal right away. So I always recommend using this one with caution. It typically is reserved for serious misconduct such as theft, threats, policy breach, etc. It also requires clear documentation and progressive discipline. I also recommend you rely heavily on your policies. So if your handbook or safety manual outlines rules around conduct, performance, or progressive discipline, reference those and make sure that they are in tip-top shape. You really want to make sure your employees know the expectations and that they did not follow them and what the consequences are of that. So again, talking about progressive discipline, it is expected in this realm of termination for cause. So unless it's something truly severe, you're expected to give the employees a chance to correct their behavior before jumping to dismissal. A simple progressive discipline program could be a verbal warning, written warning, final warning, and then termination. And the key here is documentation, employee acknowledgement, and that they know that if they continue to go down that path, what each consequence is at each stage. You also need clear documentation. So in terms of write-ups, warnings, even emails can work. It all helps paint a clear picture if you're ever questioned. Which brings me to my next piece of advice. Be prepared to defend your decision. Some things can be cause for immediate dismissal if the conduct is serious enough. You may have to go through the progressive discipline steps if it's not. Even better is if this is outlined in a policy. So consider things like physical violence, threats of violence, theft or fraud, harassment, discrimination, or major safety violations. Again, the key here is to make sure that the employees know generally what happens if you don't abide by those policies, and then specifically what happens if the employee is involved in any of those situations. All right, so some key considerations or best practices. It should be considered for serious misconduct only. Your response must be in proportionate to the situation. So the discipline must fit that situation. It's the employer's burden to prove. So that's why documentation, process, policies, compliance all matters. Context counts. You need to consider history, roles, circumstances, and use progressive discipline where possible, especially for recurring or less severe issues. And investigate first. Be fair, be thorough, and be consistent, and always act in good faith. Don't make any shortcuts. Mishandling this type of termination can backfire. So running through a couple examples of for-cause terminations. So the first one is what we'll consider a progressive discipline case. So we have an employee here who's missed multiple shifts. You gave them a verbal warning the first time, a written warning the second, and documented each absence. After a final warning where they were told what the next step would be, they still don't show up again with no call. You followed your policy, you've built a paper trail, and you've made the expectations clear. This is a strong for-cause case. Example number 2 is a safety violation, so what we're considering an immediate cause. A worker bypasses lockout procedures and nearly causes an electrical accident, even though safety protocols were followed in orientation, posted on site, and reviewed with employees regularly. This is clearly outlined in your policy as grounds for dismissal. In this case, immediate termination may be justified without further warnings because the risk to others was significant and the employee knew better. But again, documentation matters. Moving on to the next type, so it's termination without cause, which is probably the most common way people are actually let go, at least that's what we see with our client base. It's not necessarily about misconduct or policy violation. You're kind of just ending the employment relationship for business or fit-related reason, even though the employee hasn't done anything quote unquote wrong. So this kind of termination is legal in Alberta, but you have to follow some rules and you need to be crystal clear that it's not a termination for cause, or you could end up opening yourself up to a strong case. When should we use it? So the employee isn't a good fit for the role or for the culture. Maybe you're downsizing or restructuring. There's not necessarily misconduct, but performance isn't where it needs to be, and you'd rather end things cleanly than drag it out. Or maybe you're just eliminating the position entirely. There's a number of different reasons why you might use it. So you don't have to give a reason for without cause termination as long as it's not discriminatory or retaliatory. But you do have to provide proper notice or termination pay in lieu of notice. Okay, so what you are required to do, provide notice or pay in lieu. Under the Employment Standards Code in Alberta, notice periods depend on how long the employee has worked. So you can either let them work out the notice period or provide termination pay instead. That really depends on what the situation is and why you're terminating ultimately. Just like with anything, you want to make sure that you're being compliant. So when it comes to their final pay, make sure that you're paying all their final wages, vacation pay, etc., in line with legislation, including filing the ROE on time. And don't mislabel it. Don't say it's a layoff if you don't intend to recall the employee. Don't call it for cause just to avoid paying that termination pay. That's what gets employers into legal trouble. Some key considerations. So yes, there's no cause needed, but the reason must not violate human rights. For example, their age, their race, disability, pregnancy, etc. And you do need to follow the notice requirements in Alberta. So know the rules, don't guess, look it up, ask for advice if you need it, and avoid confusion with layoffs. If there's actually no plan to recall, don't call it a layoff, call it a termination without cause. Be clear and be consistent. I always say less, but say it well. And treat people fairly. So good exits protect your reputation and reduce risk. So this is where most employers get tripped up, is thinking that once they followed the Employment Standards Code, they're fully covered. But in Alberta and across Canada, there are actually 2 layers of legal obligations when you terminate someone without cause. There's Employment Standards Minimum, and then there's Common Law Reasonable Notice. So let's work through the both. Employment Standards Minimum is the bare legal minimum. It's the provincial law, and it's the minimum amount of notice or termination pay in lieu of notice that you must give based on how long someone has worked for you. Following this alone does not protect you from legal action, and that's where common law reasonable notice comes in, and it's the actual legal reality. The common law is what the courts look at if an employee challenges their termination, and it often, almost always, goes beyond employment standards. It's built out based on past precedents for similar situations, so it's a little bit nuanced and it's hard to guess unless you have followed different court cases. So they look at different rulings where the criteria might be similar to what you're experiencing or what your employee is experiencing to determine what is reasonably entitled to that employee. They consider a multitude of things like the employee's age, their length of service, their roles and responsibility, and ultimately how easy it would be for them to find a similar role. All right, so that sounds really scary and very complex, and it is. It can be for sure. But there's a number of things that you can do about it to sort of mitigate your risk. The first thing, and one of the easier things to do, is to use a very solid employment contract. And if you want to limit your liability to the employment standards minimum, your employment contract must clearly and properly state that, and it must be enforceable. A poorly written contract won't hold up in court. When you are getting contracts, get legal advice, get HR advice. One size fits all template from 5 years ago will not protect you. This is one area where investing in good legal wording upfront can save you thousands later. So, and also consider a release upon termination. Some employers offer more than the minimum in exchange for an employee signing a full and final release, basically saying that they won't pursue a claim. The trick with that is that you do have to provide additional consideration or monetary value in relation to them signing that release. So obviously handle that very carefully and ideally with some legal or HR guidance. All right, so let's talk about layoffs, the third and final item that we're going to talk about today, because this is where a lot of employers can also get confused. A layoff is not the same as a termination, and it's not a soft way to fire someone, and we see that a lot. It is a temporary pause in employment for business-related reasons, like seasonal slowdowns or project delays, and it should always be implemented with the intention that you are expecting to bring that employee back. But in Alberta, if you don't follow temporary layoff rules exactly, it can turn into a termination, and that means you owe notice or pay. So when should you use a layoff? Like I mentioned, work has slowed down, you can't keep everyone on, the project was delayed or canceled, there's seasonal operations, think like agriculture, oil field shutdowns, maybe you're in landscaping or do road work, things that kind of rely on our seasonal abnormalities and our seasonal changes in Alberta. And you should only use it when you fully expect to bring that employee back when and if business picks up. If you don't have a real plan and documentation to recall the employee, please don't call it a layoff. It's very misleading and it can actually land you in hot water. So here are some Alberta layoff requirements. It must be written notice, and you must give the employee a written notice of layoff that includes the date the layoff starts, the expected return to work date, obviously your employer name and signature. And to be valid, the notice must be in writing, and it must include Section 62 and 64 of the Employment Standards Code. So make sure that that's cited in your layoff notice as well. A handshake or casual heads up is not enough. It needs to be formal. It needs to be documented. This will protect you and also the employee. There are time limits. So a temporary layoff can last up to 90 days in a 120-day period. And if the employee isn't recalled within that time, the law treats it as a termination and you owe them notice or pay based on their years of experience and everything that we talked about previously. So for example, if you lay someone off in February and don't bring them back by June, that's over 90 days. You now owe them termination pay, even if they were laid off, quote unquote, temporarily. So their employment continues even during the layoff. So the employment relationship is technically still active, which means that person might still qualify for benefits depending on your plan. They might be eligible for EI, especially if the layoff is due to lack of work. Some key considerations for layoffs is they are temporary by definition. So you must intend to bring the employee back. Please track your 90-day clock. Don't lose track and get hit with back pay. Use calendar reminders, make notes, do as much as you can to make sure that you're keeping track of that 90-day clock. Put everything in writing. This will protect yourself with clear paperwork and documentation. And don't confuse layoffs with terminations. The legal obligations are different and the impacts are different. And have a paper trail. In case the employee later claims that they were terminated, make sure everything is documented. So with all types of termination, here are some best practices. Be as clear as possible, document everything, follow Alberta employment standards. The cost of getting it wrong is very, very high, so don't mix up your terms in terms of without cause, with cause, and layoff. And reach out for help before terminating. It's much easier to get it right before it's done than to try and fix it afterwards. So terminations and layoffs aren't just tough conversations. They come with serious legal and financial responsibilities and can cost employers thousands. Having the right process in place protects your business from risk and helps ensure you're treating people fairly. The truth is, you don't need to know every legal detail. That's why we are here. And what matters most is that your process is compliant, consistent, and aligned with employment standards and other legislation. I want to thank you for being here today. And if you want help building a termination or layoff process that fits your team and keeps you on the right side of legislation, we are always happy to help. You can reach myself and the team at hello@hradvantageservices.com or visit hradvantageservices.com. We're here to help. Feel free to reach out. Thanks again for joining, and we look forward to working with you soon.